afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's town hall. This is our ninth, our final town hall of the fiscal period. So thank you for spending your lunch hour with us today. Today we will cover diversity, equity, and inclusion and provide an update on the work that the CRPO is doing to ensure that the principles of DEI inform the work of public protection. So a little bit of housekeeping to get us started today. Please stay muted so that there is no background noise to distract the presenters. Thank you so much. We have tried to answer the questions that came in through the SurveyMonkey link before today's session. So thank you if you contributed to those questions. They helped to shape the presentation today. And we've tried to answer all of those questions that we received in advance. So if you have any questions coming out of today's session, please use the Q&A function, which is the integrated Zoom function, and staff will respond to the Q&A that we receive. And we'll do our best to address all of those questions in the hour that we have. Any questions that we don't have time for, we'll post to the college's website after this session today. So for now, I will pass it off to our registrar, Deborah Adams, to provide a land acknowledgement.
Good morning. Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining the town hall today from Takaranto, or what is now known as Toronto, and that this is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Personally, I'm grateful that I live and work close to the river that was once known as Gaba Kanang Zibi. I'm often struck by how many of our thoroughfares are on or near footpaths and transit routes that were established and cared for by Indigenous peoples. I'm humbled to think that about the stewardship that the people of the First Nations have had over the land for generations. For those of you observing the meeting from somewhere else, please take just a moment to think about the land you call home. We do this to affirm our commitment and our responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. And now I want to pass over to our president, Ken Lomp, so he can provide a few opening remarks before we start. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Deb. Welcome once again, everybody. And as Amy pointed out, this is our final town hall of the series of 9 planned for the year. So far, more than 1,100 registrants have attended the sessions, and more than 5,600 have viewed the recordings posted to the college's YouTube channel. If you couldn't attend and are interested in any of the topics we already covered, please have a look at them on the college's YouTube channel or at our website, where you can find the slides and Q&As. I'm gratified, truly am, at the level of involvement this shows. We are planning to run live town halls in the fall, so please stay tuned for information on that. As Deb already pointed out, and Amy did, I'm the current president of the college, and my name is Ken Lomp, and I am in my 3rd and last term. For those of you who have attended the other town halls, you know that I've been kicking around at the CRPO for quite some time. That time includes being on the working group that developed the entry to practice competencies, sitting on the transitional council before proclamation, and most recently working with the group tasked to incorporate the college's diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives into our strategic plan. In the town halls, I've spoken about right touch and risk-based regulation as a background to a number of the topics we have covered in our town hall series over the past few months. Usually, when we talk about right touch regulation, we focus on addressing the possibility of harm as it relates to competency and conduct issues that expose psychotherapy clients to potential risks. Our DEI work has led CRPO to broadening our approach to right touch regulation to consider the risk of harm to applicants and registrants, as well as to the public. Because we know that ultimately clinicians who have a strong sense of their professional identity, who feel supported to exercise good clinical judgment and who can bring their lived experience to their work in a balanced, safe way are going to be RPs who are better able to meet the standards of care in serving Ontario's increasingly diverse population. So the college started this work by asking what happens when regulatory frameworks themselves create barriers, particularly for equity-deserving communities. What if the risk isn't just about bad actors in a profession, but about the lack of representation or systemic biases embedded in how regulation operates? The college knew that answering these questions was going to take some time and that it needed to ensure that the voices of those who have historically been excluded from decision making be intentionally integrated into the work. Some of our staff team are going to walk you through the work that we have done to date, to share plans for next steps, and to answer questions that were posted in the SurveyMonkey before today's session. While we recognize that we have a long way to go, we are pleased to have this opportunity to share the progress we have made over the last 3 years. I'll now pass this back to our registrar, Deb Evans, to start. I just got your name wrong, Deb.
There you go.
Well, that's what happens when you get old. So back to Deb to start the presentation.
Thanks, Ken. I'll answer to anything. Again, echoing Ken's thanks to those of you who've decided to spend your lunch hour with us. We're very grateful to have this opportunity. Before we start to walk through the specific initiatives that we have on the go, and there are a number, so we have a lot to get through today, I just want to note that we've been very fortunate to have some real champions on council, committees, working in task groups, in the staff team, and amongst registrants who've spent their time and energy contributing through contributions in our surveys and our other consultations. So we're very grateful for that. It's not going to happen if we don't have those champions. A big part of that is through recruitment efforts, and Amy will talk a lot about that when we get further along into governance. But those efforts have focused on the need for diverse perspectives. So CRPO now has more than 30 non-elected appointee positions, so double the number of council members, which bring the lived experience along with the different perspectives of the communities that they serve from these people to the work that we do. You'll hear about how these folks have been engaged in making sure we're informing core regulatory functions with the principles of DEI. Likewise, staff have been asked and have really stepped up to make this as a focus. So we've recognized what is needed now is an approach that's not reliant on DEI projects, so that we're not doing these as discrete initiatives that come and then end and then we move on. Rather, we need to complete projects that will help ensure that we work from a foundation that allows everyone to participate in the profession equitably and that ensures that our public protection mandate really extends to all people in Ontario. So moving on, I think it's important to look at and talk about what this work will actually look like across the core functions that the college is responsible for. I want to note that there's a growing awareness across the regulatory community. It's not just CRPO, it's all the health colleges in Ontario. We're aware that failing to embed a DEI approach in regulation will lead to continued systemic inequities. It'll reduce public trust and it risks legal and reputational risk for regulators across the province. I think more specifically, health regulators in Ontario are aware that we can unintentionally create barriers for equity deserving community members through rigid licensing processes. We see that happen in some areas, through lack of accommodation and systemic biases in complaints and discipline. We know that internationally trained professionals often struggle with the credential recognition and that some exams and assessments may not be accessible for those with disabilities. So equity deserving registrants, particularly Indigenous and Black professionals, may face disproportionate complaints or disciplinary actions due to systemic racism. These are the kinds of things that we're starting to look at. So while we may be talking about things through the language of DEI more than we used to, I think it's really important to note, particularly for CRPO, that the profession of psychotherapy itself has always had, since regulation in Ontario and before, although I'm only going to speak to since regulation, there's always been a focus on providing care in a way that respects human and cultural diversity. You can see that. You can see that it's in the standards and the entry to practice competencies that were now established originally. There is work to be done, but certainly, hopefully people will see that it's in there right from the start. And so now we have work to do to contribute by codifying how the profession is accountable to the diverse needs of the public, and by continuing to embed the cultural safety and anti-oppression principles and doing it more than we have in the past into professional standards. We also recognize we have a critical role to play in supporting equity-deserving community members. We have to ensure that we're providing fair, safe, and accessible regulation in the province, because that translates to how care is provided. So we've taken steps to make registration more inclusive, and you'll hear about that with more work to be done. We've worked to integrate equity-focused considerations into complaints, quality assurance, and policy development, again, with more to be done. And we'll continue to work to ensure fair treatment and to reduce systemic barriers. I think a key piece here is that we're prioritizing transparency. And our ongoing DEI training and community engagement will help us work to build a regulatory environment where all registrants, particularly those from equity-deserving communities, can thrive. Moving on, I want to acknowledge that we did receive some questions and concerns about the perceived discriminatory nature of DEI. I'd like to respond to that before we get into the substance of the presentation. Similarly, we were asked a question about how the college can ensure that DEI efforts won't be subject to criticism. Well, the short answer, obviously, there is that we can't ensure this. Criticism is something that comes with regulation. We're used to hearing it. That said, council and staff are aware that there was a notable rise in anti-DEI sentiment at the moment. It's characterized by public skepticism, by political pushback, and resistance to equity-focused initiatives. Given this, we believe there's an increasing need for regulators, not just us, but for all regulators, to articulate clear, evidence-based rationales for equity commitments. Moreover, we believe that this work falls under our mandate to protect the public and always has. We're not acting or planning to act outside our mandate. We're simply taking a critical look at our policies, our processes, and our approach to ensure that we're not reinforcing any existing barriers and equities, and we're not creating new ones. It's a key part of this, is making sure that we don't have unintended consequences taking place. Another relevant question that we received on this front was around the college leadership and who they were listening to in consulting and determining where our priorities related to DEI should be. So I want to reassure anyone who's concerned about this, that this work is happening in an echo chamber, or that we aren't listening to as many perspectives as are being offered. I want to remind everyone that there are always and will continue to be registrant-wide consultations that ask for input on any of the standards or guidelines or bylaw changes that are being developed and proposed. The best way for RPs who don't feel that their perspective is being considered and who want to make sure that it is to, regardless of what that perspective is, to engage in these consultations and to provide feedback. So, questions around quotas and discrimination and the imposition of an ideology to replace or stifle competent clinical judgment, or the imposition of any kind of ism, whatever that might be, is not what the college is intending here. So I want to make sure that that's sort of, we start out of the gate with that information being up front. And now I'm going to ask my colleague Pam Bialik to take over and provide some foundational definitions to help us understand our work.
So we thought it might be helpful to start off with some definitions just to make sure everyone is on the same page as we begin today's town hall. First, per the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, diversity is about the individual. It is about the variety of unique dimensions, qualities, and characteristics we all possess, and the mix that occurs in any group of people. Race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, economic status, physical abilities, life experiences, and other perspectives can make up individual diversity. Equity is where everyone is treated according to their diverse needs in a way that enables all people to participate, perform, and engage to the same extent. Inclusion is creating a culture that embraces, respects, accepts, and values diversity. It is a mindful and equitable effort to meet individual needs so that everyone feels valued, respected, and able to contribute to their fullest potential. Where diversity occurs naturally, creating the mix in an organization, inclusion is a conscious choice that helps the mix work well together. Together, these three ideas form the foundations of DEI initiatives. We did receive a question asking if we were taking into consideration the idea of belonging in addition to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Belonging is used to describe the security associated with being included and supported, and DEI lays a very strong foundation to build an environment where everyone feels like they belong. In striving for a regulatory approach that fosters belonging, CRPO recognizes that we need to be attentive to clients who may seek the protection of the college, individuals seeking registration with the college, and registrants who carry the title RP, as well as staff, council, and committee members who are carrying out the work of public protection. Now, you might be wondering why the college is pursuing this work. First and foremost, DEI initiatives level the playing field. The college is looking to strip away inequities for both registrants and clients where possible. DEI initiatives also fall in line with the college's regulatory mandate. Our mandate is to protect the public, all members of the public, and that includes marginalized persons. In order to effectively do so, the college has to critically look at our policies and protocols to ensure we are not reinforcing any existing barriers and inequities, but also that we're not creating any new ones. Additionally, CRPO has 5 regulatory objectives. 3 of those objectives closely fall in line with and reflect the intent of DEI initiatives. First, CRPO's role is to serve and protect the public. As we mentioned before, this means all members of the public, including those who are marginalized or have faced discrimination. Protecting the public means taking into consideration how things like the social determinants of health may impact an individual's interaction with healthcare services or our registrants specifically. CRPO is also tasked with regulating in a transparent, principled, proportionate, unbiased, and proactive manner. Those last 2, unbiased and proactive, are really key here. CRPO is looking at our processes and expectations to ensure that we can regulate in an unbiased manner without further perpetuating inequities in our processes. You also heard me highlight the importance of being proactive, and admittedly, that is where we are a little bit behind. We do have some catching up to do, but I do want to assure everyone that we are undertaking the work and making DEI initiatives a focus for us moving forward. And finally, one of the 5 regulatory objectives is to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion in the provision of psychotherapy services. I think the application of this one is a little bit more self-explanatory. The goal of DEI efforts at the college is to not only recognize that inequities exist, but to begin breaking them down where we can and building those considerations into our guidance and expectations for registrants as well as our internal structures. We are well aware that nothing is going to change overnight and that this is a multi-year commitment. Now I'd like to hand it off to my colleague Amy to present on some of the governance-related work we are doing.
Thanks, Pam. So as regulators, we have several aspects of diversity to consider. We have the diversity of council and committees, diversity of the organization itself, and diversity of registrants and the public. So this puts us in a unique position to address systemic issues. And to fulfill this mandate of regulating in the public interest, the college needs to reflect the communities it serves and represents. And part of this is ensuring that council and statutory committee members have the knowledge, skills, and commitment needed to effectively execute their fiduciary role and responsibilities pertaining to the mandate of the college, the mandate that council's decisions are made in the public interest. The college acts to foster public trust through transparency about decisions made and any actions that are taken. Based on the best available evidence and reflecting on current best practices, it's important that council's decisions are aligned with changing public expectations and, where appropriate, that we're aligned with other regulatory colleges. So continuing on in the regulatory context, this primarily means that the regulator is doing all that it can to ensure that practitioners are providing safe, competent, and ethical care. And this is where DEI committees or working groups become critical. A DEI advisory group can help to bridge the gap between regulation and the lived realities of diverse communities. These groups are not about checking a box. They're about ensuring that the voices of those who have historically been excluded from decision-making are intentionally integrated into the work of a regulator. And from the terms of reference of the DEI working group, I'm just going to quote the terms of reference here. The purpose of the working group is to provide perspective, advice, and recommendations to council and committees on matters that relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion affecting client members of the public, registered psychotherapists, and related practices, protocols, and procedures. Also to enhance protection of the public through improved experiences of inclusion of diverse client members of the public, registered psychotherapists, and the staff and leadership of the CRPO. The DEI working group at CRPO did not emerge overnight. It was not a matter of saying, we need a DEI group, let's put out a call and see who applies. It was a process, and one that required us to lay groundwork and navigate internal and external readiness and build trust before we even got to the recruitment phase. Before we could formally create a DEI working group, we had to first build an environment where that group could succeed. And that meant bringing together key people, registrants, system partners, internal staff, committee members, members of the public into an exploratory space. And we called this our DEI proto group, not a permanent working group, but a temporary collective of people willing to help shape what this work should look like. This proto group worked together to develop the terms of reference for the DEI working group, and I just shared a part of those terms of reference with you, as well as defining the recruitment process that we've now used for the last 3 years that the working group has existed, which I'll talk about a little bit more on this slide. We've had a very positive response to date for all of our recruitment efforts related to positions on the DEI working group. We just appointed 5 new members to the DEI working group at the council meeting on Thursday. There are now 15 members on the working group. Over 130 people applied for a position in the last call out that we did. We have 5 new people and 10 working group members who are on their second and third terms. So over those 3 years, members have provided critical perspectives and advised on the dozens of standards and policies. Members of the working group liaise with standing committee members, and some of our current members are part of the original DEI working group appointees, so those 10 folks that I mentioned. And there was also a representative from the DEI working group who was involved in the organization-wide strategic planning project team, which was also part of the council materials if you had a chance to view the council meeting on Thursday. And all this to emphasize that the DEI working group has a strong working relationship with council, and that result is that DEI is being integrated across the organization, and Deb will speak to the integration of DEI into our strategic planning process.
Thanks, Amy. So yeah, as Amy mentioned, at the meeting last week, council received a report from our task group. They were charged with proposing a framework, essentially, within which the college could begin to develop the strategic plan that will be in place for fiscal 2026, so i.e. April 1 next year through to 2029, to incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion as a way of planning, as opposed to simply as those standalone projects or goals that I was talking about. So the 7 elements that you see on the slide are the roots that this task group came back to us with, suggesting that we need to nurture these to be able to actually get to that stage. So just a few comments about each of them. Building meaningful relationships with system partners. I guess simply put, strong engagement amplifies the voices of equity deserving communities. So we have always been committed to seeking input, but now we are making sure that we have both formal and informal dialogues happening so that engagement can be designed to ensure that these perspectives are authentically represented in CRPO's processes. We're not just relying on chance there, we're actually going to go out and seek them specifically. Comprehensive data collection is something that we've been focused on across our core functions. It identifies systemic disparities, it informs evidence-based policymaking, and it supports equitable outcomes. So we need that in order to be able to start with our strategic plan being oriented in the right direction. Integrating DEI principles. We've already started doing this, the trauma-informed approach, looking at anti-racism and anti-oppression in our processes and our policies. Doing this proactively dismantles systemic barriers, or at least helps to, and helps to ensure fair, transparent, and inclusive regulatory processes. Inclusive leadership, key piece in terms of the work we're doing. Diversity and governance, these things are essential to advancing CRPO's vision for equity and representation. Enhancing council and committee diversity, as Amy just described, and equipping leaders with tools to embed DEI into decision-making processes really strengthens our accountability and aligns us with those organizational values. So you'll see a lot of education that the council and the committees receive is in that direction. Registrant support. So looking at what we do for registrants in a registrant-focused or registrant-facing way, include things like QA processes that ensure culturally safe, equitable service delivery, that promote public trust and high-quality psychotherapy practice at the same time as addressing any deficits that there might be in the college's QA program, and encouraging registrants to address any deficits in their own provision of services. It's a vital component of the QA process, and it really is that proactive supportive piece. So looking at things like enhancing professional standards, which Pam is going to walk you through DEI-focused learning, through the case-based assessments that are part of our QA program, and then robust feedback mechanisms that promote fairness and responsiveness. So fostering a culture of continuous learning is the last one. This is essential for embedding DEI into our practices. As I said, we're committed to developing our leadership and our staff leadership and our staff team through comprehensive learning initiatives that address the topics relevant to the regulation of psychotherapists, and that really just start from the point of enhancing organizational understanding. I'm going to move on to registration just really quickly here, just to sort of cover a couple of projects that are, I think, important and worth noting. As you know, the competency profile establishes the minimum requirements, and it creates a foundation upon which registrants are expected to build through the course of their professional development. As it stands, entry to practice competencies include a dedicated section related to diversity. So that's section 1.5, integrate knowledge of human and cultural diversity. This section, in a nutshell, establishes the importance of integrating knowledge of human diversity, recognizing how oppression, power, and social injustice may affect the client and also the therapeutic process. It expects that therapists entering practice are able to adapt their approach when working with culturally diverse clients, that they can recognize barriers that may affect access to therapeutic services, and that they can identify culturally relevant resources for their clients. So you probably also know that the competency profile has not been updated since it was first published. It's time for the college to do that. Last year we did the standards, and this year we're going to start the project of enhancing or updating the entry to practice competencies. So we will be undertaking a complete review of the profile and ensuring alignment with both professional and public expectations and needs. And so I think it's important to note that one of the standards that the government has established for regulators in Ontario is that we are aware of and we adapt in response to changing public expectations. So we will be looking at what Ontarians are telling us, either directly or through research and other areas where DEI is being brought to the top of the focus. So we're going to look and see what they're telling us they need from their providers. Consultations will be broad, and we'll be using resources to make sure we have an iterative approach in which registrants, educators, and associations can also participate. So we will be looking for that feedback loop, and I would really encourage you to participate in that if you can. Moving on to the Indigenous pathway, we actually received a question to ask us how we're incorporating the voices and practices of Indigenous people. This is the most relevant place to answer that question, I think. CRPO knows that there are distinct groups of Indigenous peoples, the First Nations, the Inuit, the Métis, each coming with unique histories, languages, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs. So we recognize that there, excuse me, just like there isn't a one-size-fits-all with registration generally, there definitely is not a one-size-fits-all for Indigenous folks who want to register. So we are in the process of working with an Indigenous elder and our DEI consultants to plan an engagement process. And going back to that strategic priority that I just talked about from the task group, meaningful engagement that could include surveys, focus groups, listening circles. We're still open to developing how that will work, but that will allow us an opportunity to offer Indigenous community members the chance to tell us in a way that works for them what's needed in a pathway that would be a respectful and inclusive process that would allow them to register. The project will take about the next year, this phase. At the end, we're looking at tabling a proposal to redesign the existing pathway based on what we hear from Indigenous RPs, Indigenous community members, other allies and system partners who have a stake in this particular issue. So there is work to be done there. Just as a note for anyone who's wondering or interested in the image here, this is in Regina. It's a pathway called, or an installation that's called the Path to Reconciliation that was put up in 2023. It's a 300-foot long, 8-foot wide footpath mural on pavement. You'll see it looks like traditional First Nations beadwork, and it was done by Cree Métis artist, Gianna Dunbar, and Inuk artist Brandy Jones. So just wanted to make sure we give credit for that particular piece of art that's shown there. But please stay tuned. We will certainly be looking for more people to participate in this process as we go along. Next project that's related to registration is our self-identification data, something that we have started to talk about and something that the DEI working group was very involved in. The collection of self-identification data essentially provides information on the diversity of the people applying and being registered, gives us that picture that we don't currently have. Having this information will increase the college's capacity to monitor progress on increasing DEI in our programs. It'll allow us to recognize and remove barriers to the greatest extent possible and design new measures to achieve greater DEI in the regulation of psychotherapy as a step towards considering and addressing structural racism and discrimination in our systems. The college will use the answers that we get from this initiative once it's launched to get a picture, as I said, of who's applying and who's being registered. We really need this so we can conduct meaningful equity impact assessments. We can't do the equity impact assessment if we don't know both the numerator and the denominator in any question that we're asking. We want to make sure that the diversity of Ontarians is represented in the people who become registered psychotherapists. So looking at the registration process, we want to be able to speak to our colleagues in education programs so they can get the same picture as we have. We want to know if any group is overrepresented in the complaints process or the disciplines process, or if any group is more or less likely to struggle with QA program requirements, and if there's anything that we can do about that. It'll help us essentially to determine if any regulatory requirements or the processes that the college uses to satisfy those requirements to enforce them are biased against any group. And just looking at how this has happened on the next slide, the data governance that's needed in order to collect self-identification data, and the place that we're at right now is working on that, will be informed by the principles of EGAP and OCAP, which are on here. These are linked, by the way, if people are interested in the resources behind them. When the presentation is made available, you'll be able to link on that. So looking at self-ID data set collection and use, when it'll be collected, how it will be used and reported on, and then principles for analyzing the data. Data security, so looking at storage, encryption, retrieval, all those sort of technological supports for data, and including disposal and destruction. So we want to ensure we have appropriate separation of self-ID data from other administrative information on registrants, candidates, and anybody else in the system. Robust privacy breach reporting, have to make sure that that's in place for this in a way that works. We certainly have privacy breach reporting requirements that we already satisfy, but looking at whether they will suffice with self-ID data as part of the work we're doing. We also want, and this is a really key piece, we want to make sure that participants have the ability to update or withdraw their identity data at any point. We know that an individual's self-identification data can change. They may acquire a disability, they may change their gender identity, they may become more aware of a heritage characteristic that was previously unknown to them. And so some individuals' comfort level with self-identification data may change over time. We want to make sure we're responsive to that. Results sharing, nothing about us without us is the principle. So sharing the results of any reviews, articulating when and how demographic data will be reported on, and the extent to which the results will be disaggregated, excuse me, by identity factors. We've got to make sure we have protocols regarding sample sizes to be used when reporting, especially to ensure the protection of identifiable factors that can become an issue in the small sample sizes. And we know we're going to have some of those. The review cycle, we want to make sure that it's regular, that consultations with representatives of these equity deserving groups happen so that it's not a moment in time and then we just assume that we're getting it right going forward. We need to revisit those. We need a robust set of practices for analyzing, interpreting, and making decisions on anything DEI related. And then finally, staff training, education and training for staff involved with data, clear direction on how to do this respectfully in a way that reduces the risks of harm. So for example, a staff script for data collection and answers to frequently answered questions so that they know what our position is and they can articulate that transparently and accurately. So at this stage, we're working with our IT developers to develop a way to collect the data that allows applicants and registrants the most flexibility. So as I said, to enter as much or as little as they choose, to modify or remove the data, while ensuring we have processes in place to ensure that confidentiality is there, and that also will allow us to report on an aggregate level of data in a way that will inform decision making. One of the things that's going to happen is we'll be tracking the extent of the trust in our data collection over time. So how many people respond, how many people don't respond, how many indicate that they prefer not to self-identify, unusually low representation rates in particular identity groups. Those kinds of things will be flags that we have more work to do. And so people, when we get to the stage where we're asking for this data, people indicating that they prefer not to answer is actually a helpful way to contribute to our efforts to improve. If we know that there is a broad group of people who prefer not to answer, it tells us where we need to address our efforts. So stay tuned, there's more to come on that. And now I'll pass over to Pam to talk about standards of practice.
Thank you. So moving into the realm of quality assurance, as I'm sure you all know, professional practice standards are the minimum-based requirements for all RPs. They are the framework that supports competent and ethical practices. They contribute to the profession earning and maintaining public trust, and they are responsive to evolving practice environments. One way the college is implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion practices is through our standards. Over the course of 2023, the standards underwent a comprehensive review with the updated standards coming into effect January 1st, 2024. DEI was something that was actively being considered as we reviewed those standards, and I think 1.7 dual relationships is a really good example of how that's been operationalized. The standard takes into consideration small communities and the potential inevitability of dual relationships when working within small communities. It also notes that small communities may be geographic, but also spiritual, cultural, or bound by any other unifying experience or characteristic. The commentary speaks to small communities and offers considerations and guidance for registrants operating within these communities who may find themselves in a dual relationship. 2 additional standards have also been drafted under the direction of the DEI Working Group, a cultural humility and non-discrimination standard, as well as an Indigenous cultural humility and non-discrimination standard. These standards will advance to Council shortly, after which we will undertake a public consultation before returning to Council for approval. CRPO standards work focuses heavily on the concept of cultural humility. The First Nations Health Authority defines this as a process of self-reflection to understand personal and systemic biases and to develop and maintain respectful processes in relationships based on mutual trust. Cultural humility involves humbly acknowledging oneself as a learner when it comes to understanding another's experience. We do understand that the concepts and their applications that are being discussed in these standards may be new to some registrants, so a concerted effort has been made to provide more context than we typically would in a standard through expanded definition and commentary sections. I also want to note that these standards are by no means unprecedented. The CCPA standards, which are being utilized by the College of Counseling Therapists of PEI, Nova Scotia College of Counseling Therapists, and the College of Counseling Therapists of New Brunswick as the primary regulatory standards, offer specific language and expectations for working with Indigenous peoples, communities, and contexts, respecting inclusivity, diversity, difference, and intersectionality, as well as reflection on self and personal cultural identities. Additionally, health colleges in British Columbia have overwhelmingly adopted an Indigenous cultural safety, cultural humility, and anti-racism standard. These documents were reviewed by both staff and the DEI working group prior to beginning work on CRPO standards. Moving on, we have the case-based assessment, or CBA, which is an element of the quality assurance program. So the why of the CBA: the QA program is mandated of all regulated health professionals by the government. It is intended to support registrants' ongoing self-reflection and professional growth, engage regularly in a conscious reflection of their practice, and participate regularly in growth opportunities, uncover areas of practice that may benefit from development, and allow RPs to track and reflect on their own professional growth. And I apologize, this is out of order from the diagram, but the what of the CBA? The CBA is an evidence-based screening tool to identify risks in practice and direct resources where they are most needed to help registrants provide safe and effective care. And now, as it relates to DEI, the how of the CBA. We develop CBA cases that are designed to include content reflecting diverse perspectives and a wide variety of client experiences and backgrounds. More than 50 RPs were involved in case development. We did work to recruit a diverse group of registrants who considered potential biases and carefully worked to create cases that are valid, reliable, and realistic. To ensure DEI principles are thoroughly integrated into our cases, we are also training our case developers on DEI principles. Once the two new standards I just mentioned have been fully developed and disseminated, we will be developing cases to support RPs in their understanding and application of those specific standards. We continue to expand our case bank, and we are dedicated to continuous improvement. Feedback does play a critical role in this effort. We have listened to registrants and system partners using their insights to identify and address where biases or barriers may exist. Applying this feedback helps ensure the CBA remains relevant, effective, and equitable. We will continue to strive to create an assessment environment for everyone that is fair, understandable, and inclusive. And I will now hand it off to Deb to talk about a few additional initiatives.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the trauma-informed review. We did do an entire webinar on this, so if anybody's interested, you can certainly check back. As Ken suggested, it's linked on our website. The project flyer image in the top right-hand corner of this slide is also linked, so if you wanted to see the report that the Barbara Schliffer Commemorative Clinic rendered, you can certainly do that. It's posted on the website. So no doubt you're aware of the clinical models that are trauma-informed. We know that registrants are, by and large, very good at using those practices in their clinical work. But we want to talk a little bit about what it means to take a trauma-informed approach for regulators. So in short, it aims to uphold procedural justice standards. We can't get away from that. The procedural justice must be fair and thorough. It provides support for affected individuals, and overall, the goal is to improve the experience of those involved in regulatory processes in a conduct department way. Specifically, it means for complainants, witnesses, and for RPs. It's really important to note that we're very aware that trauma for care providers is possible, and having the college participate in processes or run processes that don't mitigate that potential for trauma and harm isn't helpful. We know that the more that our registrants are supported and feeling like they're able to participate in a fair and consistent process, the better off that the client public will be. So these goals are for anyone involved in the complaint and report process, and they include decreasing fear, anxiety, and stress, removing or decreasing uncertainty, addressing perceptions of unfairness, hopefully decreasing dissatisfaction both with the process and where possible with the outcome, avoiding the lack of engagement that we sometimes see when there's a complaint process happening, and having an overly legal process that people are not aware of or don't understand. And ultimately, we also want to look at increasing the quality of decision making. Having people participate to the fullest extent in conduct processes means that the panel that's charged with making a decision in the end will have more information and more useful information in order to be able to render fair and defensible decisions. So we're looking at this through an intersectional lens, and we're considering things like intergenerational trauma, trauma that comes from racism and discrimination, in addition to the things that you might otherwise imagine, trauma from intimate partner violence, PTSD, diagnosis, all the other ways in which your clients and potentially your colleagues show up with trauma in their work. So recommendations from our external review by the BSCC, and as I said, you can read about that. I won't spend time on it today because we won't have time. But those recommendations touched on communications, resources available to anyone involved in the process, needed policy changes, and staffing and approach. So we will continue to report on that, but just briefly to date, I can say we have hired an intake coordinator who deals with all of the incoming complaints and reports that we get, who has a trauma and crisis intervention background. So this person is a skilled clinician, in fact, who is providing that support while working in an administrative role. There have been a number of policy changes relative to disclosing information and the way in which information is exchanged with non-client complainants. We also have a risk system where we are flagging risk of information sharing, risk to reporters and clients and witnesses, and to RPs as well, so that those cases are being managed in a more mindful way. We've always been very careful to stick to procedural fairness, but now we're thinking about how they might have a trauma element to them. We have engaged with a navigator who was able to assist an Indigenous client who was looking to make a complaint, so that they had support and assistance in making that complaint. And we are looking at having a navigator role available, particularly for people who are coming, as I said, with pre-existing trauma, people who are coming forward with abuse, sexual abuse allegations, or people who have other vulnerabilities that make them more susceptible to being traumatized by the process. So there's more to come on that front, but we are absolutely making progress, and I look forward to being able to share that with you over time. Operations and the staff committee. This is something that I want to just really touch on really briefly. I won't spend a ton of time on this. As I said, we have a lot to cover today, but we are looking at staff supports. We know we need the same diversity of perspective to be reflected in our staff team. And so we're working to provide education, make sure that people are aware of what's expected and are able to participate in their roles with that DEI informed lens. We're also making sure our hiring practices are DEI informed, and that our work culture supports the goals that Council has set for the organization as a whole. We have a plan in place. We have a consultant we're working at, and we're working on the initiatives that are noted in this slide here, and we'll look forward to reporting back on those as well. Accommodations are something that the operations team take very seriously. We recognize that there's a lot of process. It's a very process heavy endeavor to be involved as a regulated professional. So we're looking at our commitment to DEI as including an accommodations process for all of our regulatory functions. We're working on codifying it and publishing it more effectively, so that the information on the matter is easier to access and more clear to those who need it. We're also working towards universal design. Right now we're sort of at the left-hand side of the box in this picture, but we're really looking at removing that fence, as it were, so that we can operate from a place where people don't have to ask for accommodations, because the processes that we have in place are accessible. And once we've implemented a framework across the CBA, for example, one way that we've done that is by implementing a universal extra time framework for the CBA. Just a small example of how we don't have to leave people to ask for more time if they need it. They just get it. So we really want it to be an accessible learning environment where individual requests are not needed, and people don't have to come forward with that information. Our new website, which we launched last year, also seeks to be fully accessible. We have work to do there, but we are working on that. And through the trauma-informed conduct processes, we're looking at accommodations as something that we want to make available more easily, more readily, and potentially without needing to have people ask specifically for what it is that they need in order to be able to participate. So that's the end of our presentation, as it were. We have lots of questions, as Amy said, that we received in the SurveyMonkey that we're going to endeavor to answer now, and I'm going to pass off to Pam to start that process.
Thank you. So as Deb mentioned, as you all know, there was an opportunity to submit questions prior to this town hall. We did try and pick the most common themes to address and either generalized or combine some questions that had recurring themes. Our first question relates to ensuring DEI-informed practices do not pathologize clients based on race, gender, religion, or other identities. And this is actually something that the standards seek to protect against. Just as a reminder, the incoming standards aim to promote equity, aim to prevent pathologizing, focus on cultural humility, and emphasize reducing bias when treating clients. We are asking registrants to be aware of and address the very biases that would result in pathologizing clients based on such characteristics, as well as provide some guidance on how to begin the process of breaking down bias. The standards aim to promote equity by focusing on cultural humility and does not impose specific or mandated assumptions about clients. I also want to note that our Indigenous cultural humility and non-discrimination standard is similarly not there to pathologize Indigenous clients. It seeks to correct behaviors that we know has harmed Indigenous communities and clients in the past. Another question we received focused on neutrality on the part of therapists and the importance of not bringing personal views into therapy sessions. At its core, this is a safe and effective use of self issue. Safe and effective use of self refers to the psychotherapist's learned capacity to understand their own subjective context and patterns of interaction as they inform their participation in the therapeutic relationship with the client. It also speaks to the psychotherapist's self-reflective use of their personality, insights, perceptions, and judgments in order to optimize interactions with clients in the therapeutic process. The new standards will set expectations and provide guidance to RPs to reinforce the requirements for SUS as they relate to DEI. I will now hand it off to Amy to answer a few questions.
Thanks, Pam. Another question or theme that we heard was who is included or excluded from DEI initiatives. The college's approach to DEI has a distinct intention of not creating exclusionary criteria. So to be clear, we're not taking an exclusionary approach. We are thinking about diversity through an intersectional lens and across the protected grounds. Our efforts seek to protect all clients and to consider the needs of all registrants. On the operational end of college processes, we are similarly not looking to identify and correct only one or two forms of discrimination. We are trying to look at our policies and processes as a whole to ensure substantive equity for all. The DEI working group terms of reference were developed to ensure that we had a broad representation of systemically and historically marginalized community groups, as well as people who hold intersectional identities, which include, but are not limited to, again, this is from the terms of reference, identity and lived experience, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples, Black community members, racialized community members, newcomers to Canada, immigrants, refugees, persons with disabilities, including neurodivergent persons, 2S LGBTQIA plus community members, seniors, gender diverse peoples, including but not limited to women, trans, and non-binary people, RPs with experience living in the near and far north, and rural regions of Ontario. So again, not taking an exclusionary approach, but thinking about diversity through an intersectional lens. And I will pass it back to Pam for a couple more questions.
One registrant asked what evidence we have to support the claim that DEI improves outcomes. To start, I do just want to reiterate that the goal of DEI initiatives is not to privilege one group over another, to force an ideology, nor is it to create undue burdens. The goal is substantive equity or leveling the playing field in a way that allows all individuals to access services without discrimination. In terms of research, there's a robust academic basis for the importance of DEI efforts in general, as well as the connections between mental health outcomes and discrimination, as well as the way in which discrimination intersects with and influences healthcare spaces. If anyone is interested in learning more about these topics, there are a few options linked on the slides, which will be distributed. The first is from the Canadian Mental Health Association and outlines options at various levels for tackling the intersections between mental health and equity. The next link is from the Government of Canada. It is an executive summary on research and data from the Pan-Canadian Health Inequalities Reporting Initiative, which discusses, among other themes, access to, use of, and quality of health services. The final link is the In Plain Sight report, which comes out of BC and details the experiences of Indigenous peoples and discrimination in health services. We also received a question asking about the credentials of individuals offering DEI trainings. CRPO will not be approving educational or upgrading initiatives related to DEI, just as we don't approve educational or upgrading or expansion activities related to different practice areas. Registrants should examine potential training opportunities with a critical eye, reflecting on whether a panel of peers and members of the public would consider the source and content appropriate. We were also asked what mechanisms will be in place to address specific grievances from therapists or clients who feel harmed or marginalized by the implementation of DEI. If registrants have concerns about the work the college is doing, direct feedback or questions to the college are always welcome. Registrants can reach out to info@crpo.ca to communicate with the college, and your emails will be forwarded on to the appropriate department. Clients concerned about their care can, as always, make a complaint. We did also receive a question regarding performance standards and whether they exist. As you have heard multiple times today, we are bringing in standards with the aim of establishing cultural humility and non-discrimination as core tenets of the profession. Registrant behavior will be measured against these standards. In terms of standards and performance measurement as a college, there's one primary tool that we use, and that is the College Performance and Measurement Framework, or CPMF, which is a document completed by regulatory colleges that is mandated by the government. We are obligated to post this document, and the link is live in the slide. If you're interested, you can see the work that has gone into meeting the standards that have been set in place for all health colleges. I will now hand it back over to Deb for a few questions.
Thank you. Sorry, I got to get my myself off mute here. We also received questions about evidence that supports the claim that DEI initiatives lead to improved therapeutic outcomes. Fortunately, there is reliable guidance on DEI's role in organizational improvement. And so we're relying on this as well as the experience that our professional members bring to the process. Research indicates that inclusive organizations are better equipped to innovate, to manage risk, and enhance overall performance. We've included some of this in the resource slides at the end of the presentation. Much of the research underscores how embedding DEI into operational practices drives innovation, risk mitigation, and improved performance, as I said. There is also a tremendous amount of clinical literature. I imagine that you're all more aware of that through your professional development related to modalities. And certainly it's something that's been embedded in the practice of psychotherapy, as you can see through the entry to practice competencies and through the standards that exist. In terms of evaluating how our work in DEI, so separate and apart from the clinical work, is going to land and what the consequences of that might be, we will be carrying out, as I said, comprehensive equity impact assessments on all of our core regulatory functions. An equity impact assessment is a tool that provides a very thorough process, and we'll be publishing more about that. The tool is available. It's part of our CPMF work, and it's available online as part of our council materials. But we will be doing more to highlight that. Once we have comprehensive self-ID data, we'll be able to do more of that work, as I said, having the numerator and the denominator. But we'll be using that to evaluate policies, practices, and programs to determine their effects on different groups and to ensure that equity is maintained or improved and that we are not seeing unintended consequences from any of those processes. We also received questions about discrepancy about who can provide assessments for gender-affirming surgical care in Ontario. Recognize that this is something that has been fairly long-standing. Not included on the slide, but I want to point out that the questioner also correctly noted that currently the second assessor can be a social worker or a psychologist, but not an RP, and that this represents a major challenge for transgender and non-binary clients outside major metropolitan areas and causes undue hardship for clients. This is something the college is aware of. Last year, we made a comprehensive submission to the Ministry of Health to outline where we believe, as the regulator, RPs could contribute to the health system because they already have the competence, they already have the clients, and they already have the therapeutic relationships. What they're lacking is the expanded authority. So we made those submissions to ask the ministry to consider expanding authority so that registrants could provide assessments in areas including providing support for gender-affirming care. We're hoping to be able to see this move forward with the ministry post-election. Of course, there was a bit of a pause while the election was happening. So we will be revisiting that with them, and we will communicate on our progress through council. So you'll be able to hear where we go with that, what we get back from the ministry, and in fact, if changes are authorized by the government, we will work with associations and educators to make sure that registrants are aware of that and they have appropriate education and support in place to be able to go through with carrying out that expanded authority. I'm going to speed up a little bit here just because we're running out of time and I don't want to lose people. This is a good question about how we accommodate human rights of transgender applicants. The RHPA requires that we have a public register, and that includes the names of registrants, and that former names are there for the college to ensure accuracy, as well as potentially for professional misconduct investigations. That doesn't mean that we have to publish it. And to be clear, we do not ask RPs, we do not require RPs or applicants to provide former or dead names if they have not practiced using those names. There's no risk to the public that if I practiced under another name, that I will be, they won't be able to find me after the fact if that's something that's needed. So in cases where a dead name has been used for practice, the information is never posted, it's not shared, it's not even shared amongst staff. It remains confidential and would only be accessed if there was a complaint about the registrant using that name. We have a search function that allows that confidentiality to be maintained. And even in those cases, the dead name would not be used by staff to address the registrant, and it would not be made public in any way. So really what we're striving there for is balance between the need to protect the public while working to mitigate harm to the registrant. And then the final question that we're going to answer before we sign off is just about equitable access. So in the past, we have posted an equitable access to care statement. It speaks to barriers, including cost, to accessible services. In the first few years after proclamation, the college worked to establish strong regulatory environment so that people could have confidence, the third-party payers, the government, confident in the quality of care provided RPs. And we've seen that bear fruit in terms of coverage, but we recognize that there is more to be done. That's an indirect way of supporting access. So something that's been highlighted with the DEI work is that we do have more to do in terms of direct opportunity to support access to care for people from the professions that the profession we oversee. Other colleges are seeing that as well. So we'll be doing more on that front as part of the strategic planning that we're about to undertake. And so we'll be able to include that in our strategic plan in terms of actually putting some resources against direct access for different groups of people. But that is definitely an area where we have work to do. So these links, I just want to wrap up really quickly. There's 2 slides where there are resources that we have found particularly useful or we have published. No doubt a quick Google search will turn up a lot more, but these are included for anyone who is interested. So as I said, we've tried to respond to the questions on our last slide here. If there's anything we've missed, please do feel free to email info@crpo.ca. We are interested in hearing from you. Practice@crpo.ca is another place to go if you have a specific practice-related question. And with that, just as we round out the year, I want to pass this back to Ken to say thank you and wrap us up for the day.
Thanks, Deb. So, and thank you all for attending today, and thank you for all your questions. Once again, it is truly encouraging to see this level of engagement among our registrants. I look forward to seeing many of you in person in October, however, no longer in the role of president. So have a wonderful day, everybody, and thanks again.